Ezra 4 through 6, and Psalm 137. Psalm 137 begins this way: By the rivers of Babylon, there we sat down, yea, we wept when we remembered Zion. So Psalm 137 goes well into the future of Israel, sitting in Babylon and remembering what it used to be like back in the hills of Jerusalem. And, of course, the memories are sad. Now they are being told by the people in the psalm in Babylon, those who carried us away captive asked of us a song, and those who plundered us requested mirth, saying, sing us one of the songs of Zion. How can we sing a song of the Lord, though, on ancient soil? And then this well-known refrain that's even popular in modern Judaism. If I forget you, O Jerusalem, let my right hand wither, let my tongue stick to the palate, my palate, if I cease to think of you, if I do not keep Jerusalem in memory, even at my happiest hour. Well, how? How would a person living in Babylon, in exile, remember Jerusalem and keep it in there, as it were, collective memory as Jews? Well, let's read on. Psalm 137. Remember, O Lord, against the Edomites the day of Jerusalem's fall, how they cried, strip her, strip her. In other words, what happened during, well, let me finish. Fair Babylon, you predator, a blessing on him who repays you in kind. And then the psalm ends with a horrific imprecation. The point is that in Babylon, the people were remembering their painful loss of a homeland, especially in these words of stripping or destroying the temple. The temple, of course, was the pride and joy of Israel. And when that temple was destroyed, of course, their collective memory here is remembering the words even of the Edomites as they watched the Babylonians destroy the land and being happy with them. Well, what should they do, or what would be the natural way to celebrate or undo the pain of this memory back when Israel was destroyed in 586? Well, we heard it in Ezra 1, and that is when they came back to the land, they would rebuild the temple. So that's what we have in Ezra. And in fact, Ezra 4 through 6, as we just read, there was a challenge put up by the people living in the area that they didn't want that temple rebuilt, probably because to have a rebuilt temple was to, in the mind of the ancients, a way to invite the presence, even the power of your deity, to be prevalent in a land. And so they didn't want Yahweh to show his power in that land, and the best way to do so, so they thought, as enemies of Israel, was to prevent them from building their temple. Well, let's finish our thoughts by just asking some questions again about this idea of a temple. It's going to be very important. This will be what's called the second temple. The first temple, of course, was Solomon's temple. The second temple is Ezra's temple, or Zerubbabel's temple, which is rebuilt here on a different plan than the first one. This will be the temple then that Herod in the 1st century A.D., actually beginning in 1st century B.C., begins to rebuild, and when Jesus is on the earth, we hear of it being in the process of being built. And so the second temple is actually started here in the days of Zerubbabel. So what is good about having a temple? Let's just rehearse some things, as I've said before. It's a great place to have your deity call a home. In other words, it's good to want to have your God find a place to call his home. Secondly, it's a good place to bring the people to worship, to have people meet their God, as it were. Of course, a temple is a good place for that. And of course, that brings up this idea of, thirdly, the idea of uniting a people around a common place, a common God, and a common means of worship. So this idea of rebuilding a temple has its merits to it. And we will hear in our readings to come, in the book of Haggai, for example, God telling them to finish the work of the temple. So we don't want to say that a temple is a bad thing. However, what I'd like you to keep in memory keep in mind as we go forward through the books that end our Old Testament reading, what are some possible problems to associate or to look for in the rebuilding of a temple? Well, let me repeat the 3 points we just made with a kind of a watch out below idea. It's a good place to have your deity call home, unless, think of the idea of actually calling it his home. I think we need to be careful, or these people here in our story need to be careful about rebuilding sacred space that was never intended by God to literally be thought of as that idea, again, of sacred space. We've had that idea before, but there will be in the New Testament to come a lot of discussion about how to handle presumed sacred space, and it can be a danger, I would recommend, when people set out to build it, literally, and treat it as such. Secondly, it's a great place for people to come to worship, but as we said at the end of our last video, be careful when a means of or that a physical structure can never be used as a means of control. And the temple will be, by the time that Jesus comes, and again, there are so many stories to tell here, but when Jesus comes on the scene in his lifetime, the second temple will be a place of control, and Jesus will be, of course, quite opposed to what that temple represents. And thirdly, it's a great place to unite people for a common cause. But here's where, and I want us to be thinking about this both within Ezra and Nehemiah, there will be a temptation starting now to not just make this a place of uniting the people of Israel, but segregating the people of Israel. And there will be a difference to be seen between uniting people around a common cause, that is Yahweh worship, but segregating the people of Israel into a religion called Judaism that doesn't take long over the centuries before, again, as we come into the New Testament, we meet a people who are truly segregated from the world to the point of being, well, let's use the word separate, but the idea that they don't even want to welcome the Gentile into their own worship patterns. That will be something to watch for again in the future, but as we've said, this is really that starting point of how Judaism begins a culture of segregation and even separatism.